Um, Look, I know I haven't used this channel in a really long time, and this isn't normally the kind of thing I do. I don't review things. I don't rant about stuff. I haven't used this channel in like 5 years, and the last video I made looked like this. But I had to get this off my chest somewhere. I know no one's gonna watch it, and it doesn't matter, but there are very few things in my life that I feel strongly enough that I need to rant about it. And if I didn't get this out of me somehow, I was going to explode. So it has to be here. I have to do something with it. And I don't... Like, this isn't really scripted much. I have kind of an outline of where I want to go with this, but it's mostly going to be off the cuff, so there's probably audio recording errors or whatever, and yeah. Anyway, I am not a long-term fan of Dear Evan Hansen. I have no emotional attachment to the material whatsoever. I never listened to the soundtrack or saw it on stage. I never saw anything of it in its entirety until I sat down to watch the movie earlier this morning. My sister loved it, and I knew other people who loved it, and, you know, like everyone else, I knew the basic story outline, but I didn't really get it. So this does not come from that kind of place where I'm a super fan. I'm kind of new to this. But as I was reading the backlash to this movie and to Evan as a character in particular, it kind of cemented a belief that I have that among movie critics and entertainment journalists and YouTube video essayists, Twitter, and all the current cultural commentators on the internet, I've come to a belief over the last few years that these people just simply no longer understand or feel the human concept of empathy. They have no ability to identify with characters or people that are flawed, or understand why anything happens the way it does beyond what they choose to and the views that they choose to have. And part of the reason I feel so strongly about this is because as I sat down to watch this, and as the movie went on, and as I saw the character of Evan Hansen grow and what he did, and what his personality was, I felt so much like him. And I understood who he was and what he did because I saw so much of myself in him. I don't know if that's egotism or projection or I don't know what, but that's how I felt. And when I see this vitriol directed at it, it feels like a personal judgment of people like me who can identify with him. When he apologizes too much. He keeps talking too much, long past the point where he should. He takes Zoloft like I do. And everything about him felt so familiar. And I felt seen because of it. And I don't understand how anybody can look at the film and think that he's a bad person. Because there's a difference between a good person who does bad things and a bad person. And nobody seems to understand that anymore. Like, I have seen, over the last few days, looking at reviews of this, I have seen Evan Hansen be called a creep, a psychopath, a supervillain, a maniac. I believe I saw someone call him a rapist. a gaslighter, an emotional terrorist. That was a good one. And it's to a point where I feel like it has to be intentional. What happens in Dear Evan Hansen is that he gets caught up in a lie. But this is a story that is as old as time itself. It's been done to death a million times. But the key difference here is that Evan Hansen's story is not really his own. His lies are not really his own. Every time he makes up something about his relationship that doesn't exist with Connor Murphy, it is at the prompting and almost the pressuring of someone else. People have been comparing this movie and this story to things like Shark Tale and especially World's Greatest Dad, but that just makes no sense at all. Here's the thing. In World's Greatest Dad, Robin Williams' character plants a suicide note that he wrote on his dead son when he finds him to cover his own ass and cover his own embarrassment. And when that gains traction, he starts using it as a means to publish his own writing. But that is the intent from the beginning.
You guys didn't like Kyle. But that's okay. I didn't either. He wasn't very smart. And he didn't kill himself. Kyle died accidentally while masturbating. I made it look like a suicide, and I wrote a suicide note. I also wrote his journal. Thank you.
In Shark Tale, Will Smith fish, he, right from the start, he is a dick. All he wants is to be rich and famous. And he makes that clear from the beginning. He steals money that his girlfriend gives him to bet on a horse race. And then he makes up this story where he killed a shark because he thinks that it will get him fame and acclaim, and it does. When Evan is first confronted by Connor's parents, you can see that his mother, played by Amy Adams, is essentially at her breaking point. She is clearly nervous, desperate, and about to crack. And she is reaching out for some kind of tangible connection to her son, who by all accounts was horrible. These parents in this family need to connect with him. They need to connect with Connor and find a way to grieve him. They want to have something that they can hold on to. And when Evan is confronted with this mistake, when they falsely believe that he was Connor's friend, he tries at first to tell the truth, but he doesn't, because they keep insisting. I mean, the first thing out of his mouth was that Connor didn't write the letter, and Connor's mother shoots him down.
I'm sorry, Connor didn't write this.
No, please. It's this.
And, as essentially all, oh, no, you don't, look, I mean, it's clearly from him. You don't have to be ashamed of this. And when he first brings up, when he's trying to come up with a story about them together, his mind blanks and he thinks about his own suicide attempt and starts talking about trees. And the mother, Cynthia, brings up the apple orchard and the stuff that their family used to do there, and Evan expands on that. When she talks about them communicating and mentions that Connor probably had emails that he kept on a different account so that nobody could read them, she herself comes to the conclusion that Evan and Connor must have communicated. All of these things, every single lie that Evan tells in Dear Evan Hansen is prompted by someone else. He doesn't lie to gain anything. He just confirms what other people tell him. Because that really ultimately, that's what Dear Evan Hansen is about. It's not about the lies that Evan tells, it's about the lies we tell ourselves to feel better. That really is the issue here. At first, Evan doesn't talk to, Evan can't talk to anybody. He can barely even use the phone to order a pizza, and I can't do that either. I mean, I'm older than Ben Platt. I'm almost 30, and I still get shaky and nervous and sit there in front of my phone for an hour before I ever even try to talk to anybody. It's horrible. And when people come to you, I mean, do you understand how hard it is to have a person come to you and almost beg you to tell them something that they want to hear, and you have to say no? Especially if you're a person with extreme social anxiety who can barely speak with anyone. Another thing that people are latching onto is Evan's relationship with Zoe, that he forms a bond with Connor's sister because he's always secretly been in love with her. But again, everything he tells her either comes directly from her mouth or is just him saying yes to something that she infers. That's the big difference here. And the stuff that I've read, like, I was reading this sum up on Twitter. Somebody was talking about the relationship that he has with Zoe. And they wrote that they described his relationship as exploiting a stranger's suicide in order to get close to his cute sister. I mean, are you kidding me? How do you even come to that conclusion? How do you listen to the song If I Could Tell Her and see that context and think, oh, he's lying to this girl to try to get in her pants? I was arguing with somebody else who told me that he was gaslighting her and lying to her about her abusive brother and trying to manipulate her memories for the sake of getting with her. And I kind of lost my mind. You cannot be a normal human person who understands relationships and understands hurt and understands how other people feel and how they react to trauma and the complicated emotions that come from that, and look at that scene and think that's what he's doing. It is so gross, and it is such a cruel, gross manipulation of what's happening in the movie that I have to believe that it's being done on purpose. In the context, Evan and Zoe are talking, and she has all these terrible memories of her brother, but now is seeing what this relationship has done to her parents and the bond that they're forming because of it, because of their relationship with Evan. And she thinks, like Evan, she thinks that nobody loves her and that nobody cares about her. The reason Evan uses this false relationship with Connor as a cipher to tell her how he feels is because he sees a girl who's in pain and who needs to hear something positive about herself, and who wants to believe that her brother cared about her and that people love her. I mean, there's no malice here. Nothing Evan Hansen does in this entire movie is out of a desire to hurt other people. I mean, if you look at a person, if you look at a character like Evan Hansen and you can't tell the difference between him and these guys, that is entirely 100% on you. I'm sorry, but it is. This whole accusation that Evan Hansen is someone who's terrorizing other people for his own benefit is just so that it blatantly ignores the context of the story and the context of the characters. It's looking at the events at their most basic Wikipedia summary level. Evan is a person who has no one. He's not close to his family. He doesn't talk to anybody. He has no relationships. And it's very apparent reading these reviews and reading these brutal takedowns of who he is, that these people who are writing it do not understand what it's like to be truly alone, to truly feel separated, and to truly hate yourself to the degree that Evan does.
Will you just come back inside, please?
They think you're their son, these people.
They're not these people.
They don't really know you.
Well, they like me. They like me. I know that that's very hard for you to believe, that they don't think I'm, that there's something wrong with me, that I need to be, fixed like you do.
When have I ever said that?
Oh, my God. Wow, I have to go to therapy, right? I have to take drugs.
There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with needing help,
Stop.
honey.
I know that there is, and I know that I'm a burden. I'm the worst thing that ever happened to you, and I just ruined your life, okay?
I mean, he's being portrayed as this schemer who's willfully and who only wants popularity and attention for himself. But every time something happens in this movie, the further the lie goes, the more miserable he gets. It's all over his face. He throws up several times because of how stressed he is by all this. He says more than once that he's horrible and that everyone should hate him. I don't understand how anybody thinks that this is malicious or that he's gaining some kind of pleasure or enjoying this. Or the trouble with being extremely socially anxious like this. I'm sorry. The trouble with being socially anxious like this is that there's a paradox. You want people to notice you, but at the same time you want to be left alone. I am a person who is terrified to text or call my friends and ask them to do something because I don't want to bother them and I don't want them to hate me. I'm a person who I like solitude. I hate crowds. I hate large gatherings of people, but I still feel scared sometimes when I'm alone. And throughout the last year and change especially, I've been more alone than ever. I moved back to my home state to be closer to my friends, but I don't see them any more often than I did when I lived out of state. And I never talk to them, and I never tell them. Because I'm scared. I'm scared of what they'll think of me. And that's why Evan keeps this up. He talks later in the movie about how he hates himself and he can't open up or express his feelings or tell the truth or even communicate or talk to other people because he hates himself so much and he is so terrified of what people will think of him, that people will hate him if they get to know him. And when I see the complete lack of sympathy, the total lack of understanding of why he does what he does, the viciousness, that makes me think a little bit that he was right. I mean, if I identify with this person, what's most infuriating is when I was reading all of these, I kept seeing over and over and over again critics and journalists and bloggers saying, a sane person would have cleared this up right away. A normal person would get out of this right at the start and never let this progress past the first meeting. And, the right thing to do would have been to tell Connor's parents the truth right away, right at the start. First of all, ignoring the fact that Evan tries to do that.
I'm sorry, Connor didn't write this.
No, please. It's this.
And secondly, whether you realize it or not, all you people who think you're standing up for mental health by saying that this movie is problematic and that Evan is a monster, what you're actually saying is he should just get over it. This isn't a real problem. He should just move on. He should just be perfectly okay with this and act like a normal person. But he's not a normal person. You're saying that people who feel like this are wrong and are monsters. You are telling people who identify with Evan to just get over it. And I don't know how aware you are of that. And I don't know if you have given any thought to this beyond your virtue signaling at all, but that's what you're doing. And again, if I feel like this character, what does that say about me? Who am I? All this Backlash has done has made me more afraid than I ever was to talk about who I am and to be honest with people and to open up to people. Because when a fictional character like Evan Hansen opens up and tries to express his struggles, and you shoot them down and tell everyone about how sick and evil he is, what does that mean you would do to a real person like me? And really, the truth of it all is, again, Evan acknowledges that this is wrong. Nobody is arguing that he makes great decisions, but I feel like people have gotten to a point, especially these pseudo-activist ranters who think that they're journalists, they've gotten to a point where they cannot identify emotionally with anybody if they do anything that is questionable. It doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter what the purpose is, it doesn't matter if they learn anything, which Evan does. It's just, that doesn't matter. He did something bad, therefore he is Satan. Do you think that's a great message to be sending to people with mental health issues? To people who might read this, who might have grown up feeling connected to this? The people who are I feel like the people who are most critical of movies about mental health issues and are quickest to dismiss them are also people who have never actually experienced any kind of real mental problems of their own. All these people are gonna defend themselves by saying, well, I have a mental illness and I have a blah, 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 blah. And honestly, for the most part, no, you don't. Some of you do, but most of you don't. Everybody now on the internet, people on the internet basically just think depression is a personality trait at this point. Every teenage girl who listens to Billie Eilish and wears black is going to tell me that she has depression. But let me tell you what depression is. Depression is not throwing a tantrum anytime you see somebody say something that conflicts with your worldview, or getting angry whenever somebody, and shaking whenever somebody contradicts you. Occasionally, semi-frequently drinking too much. That is not what depression is. Depression and anxiety is being afraid of talking to your own friends. Depression and anxiety is waking up in the middle of the night, literally vibrating in your bed with tears, wondering if it would be possible to run downstairs, grab a kitchen knife, and cut your neck open before your parents notice. Depression is genuinely hating yourself every single day. Depression is fear of being alone. And none of the people complaining about this really understand that, I don't think. I mean, I'm sure some do, but I really don't think most of them do. These people have audiences of thousands that will just lap up their every insult and their every criticism at a moment's notice, and will just laugh at anybody and anything that the internet tells them it's okay to. I've never really told anybody this. Like, people in my family know, but the reason that I never, but you know, I don't tell my friends this, I don't talk about it, because I'm afraid of what they'll think of me. And I'm afraid that, you know, if they find out how weird or gross I am, that they won't accept me, and that I'll be alone again. But when I was little, I want to say about 10, I choked nearly to death on something in a restaurant. At first I thought I was fine, you know, I went back to eating my mozzarella sticks like normal. But a few days after that, I completely broke down, and I was afraid of eating for 6 months. Do you understand? I did not put solid food in my mouth for months. I have been medicated on Zoloft for anxiety for about, I want to say 15 or 16 years. Big chunk of my life. And stuff like this is part of the reason why. And this is part of the reason that I identify so strongly with Evan Hansen. If I was in his situation, if people I barely knew came into, that I'd never met actually, came into my life and told me, oh, you were best friends with our son, please tell us all about him, please give us something to hold on to so that we can remember him positively instead of for all the violence he caused, I don't know what I would do. I don't think I could tell the truth. I mean, that would be so terrifying and so painful. And seeing people so ready to break down someone with depression and anxiety and immediately say, oh, well, that's no excuse for this, that is what I mean. We've been asked a lot in the past couple years to identify with characters who are blatantly evil and irredeemably cruel, and we've been told to break down and criticize characters who are good. And at some point, the cognitive dissonance just can't be sustained forever. Audiences and movie critics are more divided on stuff than ever because I think these cultural analysts have such messed up perceptions about what is right and what is wrong and what can and cannot be forgiven. And I think people have liked to pin this on the idea that the plot of Dear Evan Hansen is more immediate on film, and you know, people will chalk it up to the theatricality and unreality of the stage as the reason that this story was accepted a few years ago but is no longer accepted now. But that's not really it. There's been a huge cultural shift in journalistic America, especially in the last 5 years. And I think this cultural shift and filmmaking illiteracy has happened for 3 primary reasons. The first is what I would say post-ironic smugness. You remember how in the 2000s, especially in the early days of the big booming of the internet, there was a whole bunch of, people would write joke articles about picking apart some kind of plot hole in a movie or intentionally misinterpreting something to the point of hilariousness. Another great example from Willy Wonka actually is Grandpa Joe. Oh, this guy sits around in bed all day, but he gets up as soon as there's a chocolate factory to go to. And, that in the 2000s was a joke. But now it's not a joke anymore. People take this as legitimate criticism, even though it's not legitimate at all. The point isn't, in Willy Wonka, the point was not Grandpa Joe is a lazy bum. The point was he was a man who was hopeless, and a miracle happened in their lives, and it gave him hope again. But, that doesn't matter, because the literal action is he stayed in bed until they got a chocolate factory. In the New Yorker a couple of years ago, they ran a satirical article about Ayn Rand reviewing children's films. And again, that was a joke. That was a joke making fun of Ayn Rand's objectivist, flat worldview. But now, people think that. People legitimately criticize this. And it misses the point of the story so much. Everything is taken at absolute face value. Character motivation doesn't matter, context doesn't matter, story, themes, none of that matters. It's all about what literally happens, or what literally doesn't happen. Like, do you remember when Bright came out on Netflix, how many video essayists absolutely threw a fit because of Jay Hernandez's line about Mexicans getting shit for the Alamo, and talking about how could the Alamo have happened in a world with orcs, and it doesn't make any sense. That's totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. But that is what is literal, and that is what we choose to believe is the most important thing. And it's just, there's a simultaneous overthinking everything and also taking it at face value. There's a refusal to engage with stories on a personal or emotional level. Culture critics can now only think in smarm and buzzwords and an impulse to prove that they're smarter than the work they're talking about. People tend to blame this on channels like CinemaSins or the Nostalgia Critic, but that's not really who perpetuates this. People who watch CinemaSins and Nostalgia Critic and Honest Trailers and people like that, that doesn't affect how they consume media, really. At most, it's gonna make, at most, if a person is a fan of CinemaSins, the biggest thing that's gonna happen to their worldview is that they're gonna sit in a movie and they're gonna hear a ding in their head whenever somebody eats an apple. It's only the film theorists and the cultural essayists who approach everything from this extremely shallow, action-focused point of analysis. One of the other big things, talking about Wizarding World, was the other day when they announced the third one, and when, the second one came out, this was a huge point of criticism. People were saying, J.K. Rowling wrote a story where the villain wants to stop World War II and wants to kill Hitler, and the heroes are trying to stop him. And, okay, let's look at the scene where Grindelwald talks to all the wizards. So you watch this, and instead of thinking, oh, this villain has a terrifying genocidal motivation that was motivated by real-world tragedy, and that kind of is understandable and horrifying, or, this villain is manipulating people into fighting against their own interests based on paranoia of a future event that hasn't happened yet, because, that never happens. No evil people ever do that. Instead of seeing that, you chose to see Grindelwald wants to stop Hitler. Okay, seriously, how does this even work? How do you look at this and unironically think that? Sorry, that is a 5-year-old's understanding of what is going on. But that's what I'm talking about. There's no place for character motivation, context, story, themes. Will Smith Fish lied to people and it made him more popular. Evan Hansen lied to people and it made him more popular. And Robin Williams in that stupid Bobcat Goldthwait movie lied to people and it made him popular. Therefore, all three are the same. I think that's part of how we got to this point where we're continually being told to identify with and have sympathy for actual sociopaths and break down and deconstruct characters who are good. And I think it's also why we're being asked to identify with and have sympathy for characters who don't really have any struggles or real problems, but it's continually insisted that they do. We are told that these people have struggles, but watching their lives and watching their stories, it doesn't feel like that at all. There's a massive disconnect going on. The second thing that I think is the reason for this cultural shift and this lack of understanding of storytelling is the Me Too movement and cancel culture. Look, just let me get this out of the way real quick. Calling out and punishing people like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein was a good thing. I'm not arguing against that. That's not the point I'm trying to make here. People who do legitimately wrong things need to face consequences for that. And, that's all well and good. But the problem is, we dove into this so overzealously, it began to alter our perception of how guilt and innocence works. Everything is in absolutes. There is no room for forgiveness or growth or empathy. So if you do something wrong, or if you do something that a certain group of people perceives to be wrong, that is the end. So not only has our culture developed a grasp of character and emotion and story context about as deep as a kiddie pool, we also now believe that if a person ever did a wrong thing, it is because they themselves are evil and should be cut off from society. And the worst thing about this is that so many of the people talking about how Evan Hansen is a sociopath or a serial killer in training, they're the people who participate in this real world thing that hurts real world people. Like, do you remember when John Gibson, he was formerly the head of Tripwire Games, the developers of things like Maneater. He, on Twitter, expressed that he was pro-life, that he did not support abortion. That is all he said. He did not say anything negative about women. He did not say anything dismissive of people who do support abortion. He said nothing. He said nothing that could be interpreted as aggressive or cruel or detrimental to other people. But the vultures descended. Everybody on Twitter was freaking out, calling him a monster. News articles ran with it, journalistic websites, Twitter users, all talking about what a monster he was and how he needed to be removed from the creative space. There was this assumption that because he believes this, he must think this, he must be a bad person, he must do and say and feel things that we don't want him to. So he was threatened. I'm pretty sure he was doxxed too, and he was fired. One thing in particular that drove me to talk about this was I was really upset by this, and I realized he could potentially legitimately come to harm because of this, and that's wrong. And this one guy who writes for, I think, Fanbyte, he sent out an open invitation for, hey, anybody who works at Tripwire Games who's got a story about John Gibson they want to talk to me confidentially about, hint, hint, wink, wink. And what I realize with this happening, what is going on here is he's essentially inciting an open season on this guy. Because if a person can come to him with total anonymity, they can say anything. And he would probably publish it because he wants there to be a negative story about John Gibson and about Tripwire. This is, you're actively encouraging people to lie about someone else and to put them at risk and to put their mental health at risk. And there's no consequences for that. And I'm ashamed to admit, I got into a fight on Twitter with some people from Fanbyte about this. I did that, and it was wrong. But I saw that somebody could be hurt, and I wanted to stop it. It was wrong of me to get into an argument, but I did. And I was talking to people from Fanbyte, and I pointed out to them, you are actively putting a person's safety and well-being at risk because you don't like their politics and you don't like what they believe. And the response I got was, yeah, so? Yeah, that's basically what we're doing. Okay. I mean, this is insane. This is psychotic. This is sociopathy beyond a level I even knew existed. But that is where we are, culturally. Evan Hansen did a bad thing. So therefore, by these rules of cancel culture and by these rules of Me Too, the motivation doesn't matter. And what he learns from it doesn't matter because bad is bad and must be punished. And, you know, I really hate to be one of those guys. I really do. I really don't want to be like this, but I honestly found myself wondering if people would react to this story the same way if he were not a white guy. Because, again, a lot of the characters over the last few years that we're supposed to identify with, who are explicitly evil, but we're told are the good guys, most of them are women. And I feel like that, too, is an overcorrection from the Me Too movement. There's been this push to excuse anything a female character or a woman does and condemn any bad thing a man does, regardless of whether or not there's a good reason for it, regardless of whether or not there's emotional turmoil behind it. Whether or not it's reasonable, it doesn't matter. And I can't help but wonder if that plays a part here. I mean, I'm sorry, but I really do. I am absolutely terrified of how people would react to Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors if that movie came out today. The third reason for this cultural shift in film illiteracy, and this might sound weird, but bear with me here. I think the third thing is the great Tumblr exodus. See, remember when Tumblr started driving the porn accounts away, and they shut down any adult content on their site? That forced a lot of the people who posted stuff there to migrate to other places. And, you know, we used to make fun of Tumblr. Tumblr was kind of its own corner of the internet. it was, to be honest, it was the containment zone. But when Tumblr started being more restrictive of its content, a lot of those people went to Twitter, which has much more prominent access to the real world. It had a much bigger influence. It had a much bigger reach. It had connections to much more notable people. And when you have a big enough group of people shouting something for long enough, others start listening to it. I mean, I hate to be blunt about it, but insanity went mainstream. And, you know, maybe I'm being a little too overdramatic about this. I probably am, but I can't help but feeling like the migration from Tumblr to Twitter was one of the worst things to ever happen to the modern internet, because it allowed these hysterically unhinged people to fester in public space. And that's affected real world policy and real world decision making in a way that it couldn't before. But yeah, I mean that's just it, isn't it? The point of all this is that all of these cultural critics, all of these analysts, all of these essayists who will ramble on for an entire hour and not actually say anything, but think they're intelligent, they have this point of view. And that is how they're choosing to, and because of that, they have this determination that they have to be morally righteous. They have to be better. They have to be smarter. They have to be offended by things that aren't offensive on behalf of other people. And the response to Evan Hansen is nightmarish. Back to what I was saying a long time ago. Geez, I can't believe I've been talking this long. I am so sorry to anybody who's actually listened to this. This must be... I'm sorry. But the point is... Sorry, I need a drink. They are attacking characters like Evan, and in a way attacking people who identify with him because of their behavior. What you think you're standing up for mental illness, and you're pushing the idea that this movie is dangerous, and yet you are expressing no sympathy or understanding for anyone who feels like this, for anyone who might act like this. I mean, you know, we used to lock people with any kind of mental illness in insane asylums. We used to portray people with any kind of mental illness as serial killers. And that is what you are doing. You're doing the very thing that you think you're fighting against. Let me tell you something. What's dangerous isn't telling young people struggling with depression that no one needs to be invisible, that you're allowed to make mistakes, even big ones, because people will still love you if you grow from them. That's not dangerous. What's dangerous is telling kids with depression who hunch over and whose hands shake, like mine, that they look like Nosferatu. What's dangerous is telling them that they should just get over it and act like normal people. What's dangerous is telling them that characters who act like them and look like them are dangerous and don't deserve sympathy. That's what is dangerous. That is what is exploitative. You got that? Remember Joker in 2019? People were obsessed with the idea that this was dangerous and that this was an irresponsible portrayal of mental health issues. And yet, you look at a character like this, who is essentially jobless, who is mentally ill, who can never achieve his dream, and who fails at everything. And you think that, and you tell me in your reviews of the film, that he is a creep and a loser who doesn't deserve help and doesn't deserve understanding because of what he does later and because of what you imagine the response to the film will be. Remember, in Dear Evan Hansen, at the very end, when the truth gets out, and by the way, the only people who ever do something intentionally wrong, purely for their own benefit, are his friend, Jared, and his other friend, Alana. These are the people who do something wrong and exploitative here. And as soon as that letter goes online, people start attacking Connor Murphy's family because they perceive some kind of slight from them. They begin condemning these people that they don't know for actions that they don't understand, sending them death threats, trying to dox them. That is you. All of you who are attacking the ideas present in this movie, attacking the idea that we should have sympathy for people who do something wrong, that's you, not Evan. Joker, when that came out in 2019, journalists and cultural analysts were whining nonstop about how threatening they thought it was. You people were practically on your knees begging for someone to die so that you could be validated and you could write more about it and that you could prove your point. But, the character who's too afraid to speak up, that's the evil exploitative thing. The people who want to write a genuine story that might actually connect to people with real mental health issues, they're the villains here. Oh, and hey, again, talking about the cancel culture thing. People have lost their jobs, people have lost their autonomy, people have lost their ability to work and live and behave freely and live peaceful lives because of this, and you encourage it. Remember that time that Zoe Quinn lied about Alec Haloka, the developer of Night in the Woods and Aquaria? She lied about him. All you journalists ran a whole bunch of stories about it. The next day, his studio fired him, and 4 or 3 days later, he killed himself. And his sister went on Twitter and talked about how he had had mood and personality disorders all his life and was an abuse victim himself. And he went to therapy and took medication. Instead of having any understanding, instead of investigating anything Zoe Quinn said, you pressured him. You advertised this. You spread it around everywhere, and he killed himself. This is real world harm. You are the reason that characters like Connor Murphy and people who are like him in real life kill themselves. How dare you tell me that this is manipulative, or that people who identify with this are creepy, or that people who are like Evan are evil or gross, or that they're manipulating other people's feelings, or that they're profiting off of misery, or that they're exploiting serious issues and teen suicide for their own benefit. How dare you? That is you. All of this is you. Like I said at the beginning, I never was a big fan of Dear Evan Hansen. I mean, you don't have to love it. You don't have to even mildly enjoy it. To be honest, as a musical, I just think it's okay. The only song that I'll even vaguely remember is the first one. As far as Pasek and Paul goes, I liked The Greatest Showman a lot better, just from a musical perspective. But I looked into the Evan Hansen fandom after this, and what I found was that Dear Evan Hansen has literally saved people's lives. You actively try to destroy them. Evan Hansen is not a sociopath. People who think he's evil are sociopaths. Because you don't understand. And you'll never understand. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of this. I'm sorry for going on this rant. I'm sorry for talking about it. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't. But that's what it is. Okay? And all of you people who have felt the same hurt and the same loneliness that Evan, and the same fear of being hated, and the same fear of disappointing anyone around you that Evan does, and to anyone whose life was improved by this, you have value. That matters. And these people do not speak for you or for any of us. And I guess that's all I have to say.